Okay, so we'll go ahead and get started. I'm going to go ahead and call to order this Guiding Principles Strategic Planning Ad Hoc meeting for today, June 29th. I'm going to do roll call. So James?
Present.
Melissa New?
Here.
Tom Bluerock?
Here.
Carrie Kale is here, and Wyatt, I don't think will be joining us today. He's under the weather.
I thought he was going to listen in, but
Yeah, he said he might. So we'll go ahead and get started and see if he pops in.
Hard to imagine Wyatt without a voice.
Here he comes, actually. There he is. Let him come in here, and then well, he's coming in, and then I'm gonna Wyatt, I don't know that you're gonna talk or turn your video on, but we see you.
Do what you can.
We'll let you listen in, and hopefully you'll feel better soon. Let's go ahead and do approval of the minutes for last week, which would have been June 22nd. Do I have a motion for approval of the minutes?
I'll make a motion to approve the June 22nd minutes.
I'll second it.
I have a motion by Newt and a second by Tom Bluerock. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And Wyatt is typing in yes in the chat as well. He has no voice, so thanks, Wyatt. All right, well then let's go ahead and move into our discussions for today. I am going to, one moment, put my screen in the right place. I'll share my screen. Okay, now. So this is our deck from last week. I'm going to pop us back. Actually, let's go to here. And then, hold on, you guys, sorry. Okay, so this was what we determined as next steps when we left off last week. So revision of, review the vision statement draft. Review the goals, and then think about values. I know, James, last week you had a couple of, just to kind of get us all in the right frame of mind, you had a couple of cities that you had looked up their strategic plan or some other their policies. I think one of them was able to get connected to the agenda, but the other I think we had a problem with. But
yeah, the city of Mercer Island puts theirs into a spreadsheet, and that just smacks of being next door to Microsoft land. So I'll contact the city over there and see if I can get them to parse out something. The point that I wanted to get at with them was their land use plan, which is similar to how Sun Valley's land use plan is, and how they approach it.
Perfect. Well, let's keep that. I'm sure you probably have that there with you, so maybe you can make some references to it as we have that discussion. Let's go back. Let's start with one here, which was the review vision statement. And I know you all had asked me to ask Max Yorkberg if he would take a look. I didn't really specifically say the format in which we wanted him to look at it and put it into something. So this is what he gave me. He said, here's like a stab at it. I gave him the vision that was above, and this is what he came back with. And so I wanted to share that. So he put it more into a sentence structure. So I'll give everybody a minute to look at that.
I sort of like the bullets. I think they're easier to read. The only thing I had is that whatever the bullet statement is should just complete the sentence, and that's just a form thing.
Mhm. Thanks, Tom. James,
That's a
Melissa?
decent sentence, the last one. It sort of says everything.
Mhm.
It feels a lot less like a run-on list in the bullet point format. You can parse out, or at least be able to separate the different thoughts when
Yeah.
they're brought out like that. I mean, I like what Max wrote. I just think that it's very long, and you have a hard time, you get lost in the middle of it.
You could read that top thing at a glance, and I like those things in parentheses: people, economy, place, and context. It sort of says why you're saying this, and
Yeah, we'll keep that.
it's just I think we've got the message. I think we're just looking for the forum.
Mhm. Okay, so let's, Melissa, do you have, I'll give you a moment to have a.
Yeah. I think one of the things that stands out to me in Max's was this little bit that he added, small town character. I think that that's interesting that he went from unique physical character to unique small town character, and that's an interesting adaptation of what we had written, and not I don't know, something to consider.
And then let me,
Go ahead.
Tom, yeah, Tom, let me just, I'm gonna put in Wyatt is communicating with me in the chat as well, and his comments were, I liked small town character, as Melissa brought forward, and then I also like Livingston is known as.
Okay. I like small town character too, because I think it's just a little more descriptive.
Mhm.
But it could, I mean, we're still talking about which form whether it's bullets or a sentence, but we could use small town character in the bullets, obviously.
And Wyatt just chimed in and said, but in the bullet format. So so I hear James, Tom, Wyatt likes bullets. Melissa, where are you at?
I don't have a strong preference between the two.
Okay.
So I'm more focused on the content, and I think that we're getting to a good place with content, and the form doesn't bother me as much. So I'm happy to go with consensus.
Okay, I could go with bullets as well. I just think it's a little different. I don't know. I think I like it because it is a little more concise and not so, one very long sentence. I do like,
Yeah.
go ahead, James. Yeah.
The only thing I was thinking, just in the bullet point that we're seeing, is what if we take number 2 and we make Livingston as a community that is economically vibrant and diverse?
Let me see if I can get in here.
I like what James just said.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so James, I'm gonna have you help me just a little bit here so I get it right, because I'm gonna change it in here. So you said, so at the top is Livingston is a community that is, and then
Economically vibrant and diverse.
We know what you're saying economically.
yeah, I'll fix it here in just a second. I'm the worst speller ever. So you just have
Public typing is, I think public typing and public math are always hard.
but I readily admit that I'm a horrible, oh my gosh, and this is the problem I don't have.
Oh, here, just.
It's ALLY if that helps.
Thank you. I'm sorry.
So ICALLY. So the I before the C. Yeah.
Or C, except after E. Okay. All right. So Livingston is a community that is economically vibrant and diverse. Let me see. I've got some names coming in. Thanks, Why I said I can clean it up for you. I appreciate it. Okay, so I will also say that I heard from Tom that we want to make sure that it sort of is like each one is a sentence. Is that what I heard from you, Tom? Right?
Yeah,
So,
no, it's a form thing, but
yeah,
I think you're close. Livingston is a community that is Livingston is a community that is fostering its unique small town character, is maintain. I think all those are sentences, aren't they?
now, okay, I'm going to bring up one more thing. There were several people that really kind of liked this small town character.
Yeah.
Is there fostering
And
its
put small
unique,
town instead of physical.
Yeah.
what do people feel about that? Remove physical to its
It's more descriptive.
town.
It gives you a thought in your head of what
Yeah,
a small
yeah,
town
yeah,
is, other than
yeah,
just
exactly.
physical character.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm getting a yes from Wyatt. Melissa, I feel like you're thinking, so I want to give you a second.
I was just waiting. I think it's more relatable and understandable, the language. Like, I think it conveys in a more accessible way what we're trying to say, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Also, in the last one, I like the idea of neighboring open lands. That neighboring is a nice word.
Thought. So it would say maintaining its relationship to the neighboring open land.
Right.
I also like that.
Yeah.
I like that. I think it tells that story of what we're trying to get at with where we are in the landscape and how we sort of interact with the landscape. So I like that word. I think it conveys a lot.
What about, and this is just to throw this out there, Livingston is a community that is respecting its relationship to the neighboring open land. Just maybe tossing out maybe another adjective instead of maintaining.
I like maintaining better because it says that you're trying to preserve an existing condition. I mean, and
Yeah.
it's really what the growth policy talks about.
Yeah.
Wyatt says he prefers maintaining, and I'll agree too. I think the idea that we're keeping it, we're working to keep it and not lose it.
And not develop it. You're a town in the landscape, not a town in the middle of a bunch of suburban sprawl.
Melissa, thought?
Yeah, I can hear what you're saying. I think for me, maintaining would be a way of respecting, but I could understand that for some people, respecting doesn't necessarily mean maintaining. Yeah, so I think I'd lean towards maintaining, given those two choices.
Okay. So I'm going to change it then in here to maintaining its relationship to the neighboring open lands.
I think it's getting pretty good.
Mm-hmm. Open lands. Okay. I think that's looking good. Oh, I'm getting a note from my wife says I think it's great.
I think we've got it.
All right. Would people feel good if we move down the line here?
We have to do it eventually.
Yeah.
Good. I think that's good work, guys.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
thank
feel
you,
good about it.
Max. Thank you,
Yeah.
Max.
Okay, so I'm gonna remove this, which was Max's suggestion, but it was very helpful. I will let him know.
We took some of the, we took some
Yeah.
of the wordsmithing out of that and he helped that. Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
no, I think it was great. So thank you to that. Okay. And I'm gonna pop back down. One moment. Okay, so review goals was our next, the next thing on our list. And I'm gonna go to here because this is where we had left. I'm gonna do two things. So goals on this, on slide 27, where we see quality workforce, financial stewardship, infrastructure, public engagement, collaboration, safe and healthy community. That is what's on what is currently in the policy or the plan. Last week, we discussed removing infrastructure, and then we also reorganized these goals into safety, health, community as number 1, then the public engagement as 2, financial stewardship as 3, and quality workforce as 4.
Do we need to say quality workforce? Doesn't that kind of go without saying? You wouldn't want a substandard workforce. I mean, you really need to say that.
So say, do we?
But then you should have a couple more goals. I mean, 3 goals is kind of skinny,
Mhm.
seems.
Melissa, do you have thoughts on this too? I know, I feel like you probably know this strategic plan a little more intimately than the rest of us. So I wonder, and I'm going to look for my paper copy, but you go ahead. I'm
gonna try to channel my inner Wyeth here and see what I can come up with, since Wyeth is the strategic plan master, I think. But I was thinking about this as when you brought that up, Tom. So the strategic plan, right, is a whole city document. Like, this part starts with the commission, and then after the goals are set, right, like it gets filled in by the commission and city staff, and like all of our different priorities go in it. So the hiring of the workforce is not as like that. The city commission hires 1 person. The rest of the workforce is hired by the executive branch, and it is important. And I also don't know. I don't know. I guess what I'm seeing from this list is what's missing when I think about what's important in Livingston right now. So maybe that's a place to start. And then we think about what to keep on the list, like what the most important is. I think that's kind of what Tom was getting at too, is like maybe adding some things.
Yeah, and the order is much better.
The flipped order, you like?
Yeah.
Oh, well, is this a good time, Carrie? Can I share what I really think is like a thing that's not, I'm real concerned about implementation of our growth policy and moving on that housing action plan. We are in a crisis. Just was talking to a constituent today who has been impacted by 3 natural disasters in a row. Every single time it takes out their business and they have no place to live. And and that's like one of the more extreme examples, but also like not abnormal right now in Livingston.
Yeah.
So I'm really concerned that housing isn't on this list, housing and are just generally implementing our growth policy, because so much of it relates back to housing. And I think that falls in line with something that James also had identified. I think it's important. I think it's one of the most important things, I think, in this community over the last few years. And I don't know how we can move fast enough to do what we have to do. So for me, I almost put that, the top of the list, if not the top of the list, maybe after safe and healthy, but way up there. I mean, housing.
Safe and healthy community is kind of a really good opener. And I agree. I mean, how do you word that? If you made number 2 how
So, Tom, I can see that that you're thinking, and I want to get to that. I want to let people just kind of have a couple of thoughts in here first. So
Mhm.
Melissa, I think we cut you off, so let you finish, and then just before you start again, once you're done, Melissa, I have a couple of things from Wyatt that I want to chime in as well. So go ahead, Melissa.
Okay, yeah, I think that it's that really the growth policy and the recent additions to the growth policy are heavily on my mind, because since I've been on the commission for about 4 years, it's the kind of, I'm sorry, I should clarify the things that we've added to the growth policy. One is the active transportation plan, and the other was last night, good job, commission, the housing action plan. So those two things to me are things that we should really be prioritizing, because we've invested a bunch of time and resources into making those plans. And I think, I just think it's so important, Carrie. And I think this is the place to put it as a high priority, so we can make sure resources and work are going to these priorities. That's what I think. I'm done.
Great, and then thank you, Melissa. And I just wanted to share from Wyatt too, because I think this is important. He had a couple good thoughts in here, and I think this is good. Like, let's get some thoughts out about the goals, and then let's brainstorm together like how we can maybe change them. But Wyatt asked the question, which I think is a good one. Is this document used for the evaluation of the city manager? And the answer is yes. We do use it as something that we evaluate the city manager against. So I think that is an important thing to keep in mind. And so thank you, Wyatt, for bringing that. Wyatt said yes to housing when Melissa made that comment. And then he said, he also has in here, his comment was, sorry, housing or smart growth as another way to think about housing. So I wanted to make sure that we shared those. And James, do you have any just thoughts that maybe we should keep in mind as we then go and maybe look at changing these goals?
So the way that I understand it, and the way that I've seen the other cities' comprehensive plans used, is that the land use plan is essentially how you determine where and what, because that's what the city does, is decides all of the where and the what for the dirt. That's what we have, is the dirt. So the transportation, housing, all of those come under the bubble, or the umbrella, excuse me, of the land use plan. And that's a real stickler. We don't have something like that right now, and there's going to be a lot of public input on it. But that's how the city has its marching orders for, we need to put housing here, not just anywhere, but here. This is what it needs to look like. This is what kind of density we want here. This is where we're going to have green space, et cetera, et cetera. I feel like the infrastructure goal kind of touched on that, but it isn't really a goal, and it's not really a plan either. It doesn't work out that way. And at least the successful communities that I've seen that also have the same kinds of problems that we do. I mean, the workers in Sun Valley don't live in Sun Valley. They've got to go someplace else. And Mercer Island is ridiculous, and they've got their own housing growth issues. So, the way they tackle it is, eventually you get to a part where you have a hard and fast document where you can say, this is where this is going to be this year, next year, 5 years, 10 years, and this is what we want it to look like. I think that's where we spend a lot of time, or we're going to have to spend a lot of time, not necessarily us, but in our recommendation to the commission, is we need to develop this plan in order to be able to develop all of the rest of the plans that we have.
One thing that struck me is you don't talk, infrastructure is not a goal, but what the infrastructure does are goals, which is provide adequate housing for, that's a goal. That's a goal. Provide a good transportation system. Provide commercial viability. Provide those kinds of physical things. Might be, and they all kind of relate back to the growth policy. Growth policy talks about all those things, but putting them in goal format, how providing housing is a key goal because it's not met right now. Other things are doing better, but housing isn't one of them.
Melissa?
I just want to make sure I'm just thinking about synthesizing what I'm hearing. I'm going to make a statement, and I'd like to hear if this is kind of like what James and Tom were thinking. So are what you say is what you're saying basically like implementation of the growth policy as a goal. And so I think maybe James, that's what you're talking about with the plan. So we have this big document, the growth policy, with a list of like a bajillion, I don't know, it's not a bajillion, but it's a lot of objectives in it, including the things too that you named, Tom. So really like working on implementing that plan. And then the strategic plan is the place where they set like the 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, whatever goals. It's so is that kind of what you're thinking, like implementation of the growth policy? And then the strategic plan would be basic, that section of the strategic plan potentially would basically be that plan that you were describing, James?
Yeah, I mean, you need to have this, you need all of the extra stuff. The city needs to have safe and healthy community. These are the goals that you would have. But the route to get those and to be able to plan for those is the land use plan. You have this much land, we need to accomplish this much for housing percentage of low, medium, and high density. Here's where we're going to do it. Here's where we expect to have growth. It also works as in the other direction when someone comes in, says, I want to put a subdivision way over on the north side. Doesn't meet the plan right now. We can't do this right now. You have to put it somewhere else in the city limits. Let's show you where you can go. That's the control that the city has, is over the dirt.
Well,
So that's how you determine how you get to your goals.
the city could be, and many cities are, more aggressively promote. Some cities have housing authorities. They build housing. They do more than just zone for it or allow for it. They're actually more proactive in providing it. But one thought that I had is we do have a growth policy, and now didn't we just adopt a housing plan?
Last night, as a matter of fact.
And so why couldn't you just say that? Because that really does kind of hit all those areas, and it also brings housing front and center because it is a bullet.
I'm gonna chime in with a couple of things from Wyatt here. On this particular conversation, he said it depends on how important the housing is, the housing issue. If it is more important than other land use, then it should be called out separately as a long-term goal. If growth and smart growth is important, I'm sorry. If growth and smart growth is important, then that is a different goal.
Yeah, growth for the sake of growth, just putting houses everywhere we can stack them isn't going to do us any good. That's not going to help out. The growth policy really starts to get at how we grow and what form that takes. I mean, it really says that we want to stay as a small town, kind of contained within its boundaries in the open land, and that growth should happen more internally than externally, like it's happened in so many places. I mean, that's an incredibly strong statement, and I think it's one of the real strengths of the growth policy. The housing policies within that growth policy, housing is a particular issue because it isn't being provided. And there is a separate policy on that. I kind of start leaning toward being very specific about implementing the growth policy, which would mean sort of making the zoning code consistent with it, which it isn't right now. Land use.
I mean, as I've observed it, it's kind of being implemented very piecemeal and in a non-comprehensive way. And I think it should be looked at way more comprehensively. I mean, there's a lot of places that are zoned for housing that the growth policy says are open space. I mean, what do we do about that?
Yeah.
And that's what the land use plan does, is it avoids all of that patchwork of this week somebody decides they want to put something here, next month somebody decides they want to put something there.
Well, the growth policy is very specific about where things go.
And a land use policy is too.
I
Or
think
land
the
use
growth-
plan, I guess it would be.
I think the growth policy has a land use plan within it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like the key part of it.
Right.
The two things they're not the same thing, but they complement each other.
There's a lot of goals and a lot of written goals, but there's a map that
Yeah,
tells
it's got to be a map. It has to be a map.
yeah, well, it's in the growth policy.
Well, true, but then in the infrastructure part of the organizational goals that we just went through, they have a list of just named properties of this and that and this addition and this subdivision, and it's not in a map. It's just a list on Excel spreadsheet.
So I think I have a couple things. One, like growth policy versus land use plan. What's the difference? Are they a little simultaneous? Like, do they mean sort of the same thing, but in different states?
I think by saying the growth policy, you're including a land use plan. Or you could say and as a goal, you'd like to implement that growth policy, and it is something that isn't done and needs to be done. Or I think it needs to be done. Maybe everybody doesn't, but I do. And it is the adopted policy of the city.
Go ahead, Melissa.
Yeah, I am picking up what everybody is putting down. I think that the growth policy is, it's a comprehensive plan. So it touches on everything that we've talked about, plus the appendices, which are the housing action plan and the active transportation plan. It sounds to me like what James is suggesting when he talks about land use plan is specific implementation of those land use tasks, really prioritizing and making a list based on like the future land use map and our goals with the future land use map. And it sounds like also what James is saying is maybe think beyond the spreadsheet when we make a strategic plan, is maybe consider other formats that actually include maps. So it's a bit more visual how we're like meeting our goals. I agree with that, what everybody's saying. I think, as a commission, we've been, the growth policy was adopted, and then our city planner, which we don't have right now, but our city planner really, he just went after the lowest hanging fruit, which was great, and just tried to start implementing things as much as he could, right? Which was great. He was because zone changes are very, very expensive, depending on like how many properties there are. Like the whole process, it does cost money because it requires like noticing. And when you're talking about all of town, I can't remember the quote. I've heard the price before when Matthew was still here, and it was more than I would have expected. But I guess my point is the commission has never sat down and prioritized what's most important to get done first with the growth policy. That would be part of the strategic plan conversation. I think we right now have a unique opportunity to help give that feedback to the commission and say, here's how we think you should start implementing these things that you've passed. I think that we could help in this goal section here really start to pull those things out for the commission, because there's so many directions that we could go in and we can't do all of them at once. So I like where this conversation's going. I would like to see us make some recommendations like this to the commission, because this will drive what gets done first and where money is allocated and where resources and time are allocated.
Yes.
Thank you. And I want to pipe in with another comment from Wyatt. And I think this is important to you. What do you want to hold the city manager accountable for, and focus on city housing separately? I would say that housing for me is more important than the growth plan. For the next 10 years, this will be the big issue.
Sorry, I'm gonna try to say something just because I think it's so important. I hear everything that everybody's saying, and I agree with the process that's being outlined by Tom and James. I just think that if you don't solve the housing process, a lot of the other things in the vision just kind of fall away. And I do think it's going to be the big issue for the next decade, is how to do intelligent, diversified housing in this community. And to the extent, I think it almost should be separately called out in somehow a language that's maybe a little more inclusive. I think implementing a growth or land use plan is too general and too broad of a statement. And I think that we have an opportunity to send a direct message about what the community cares about. So,
Well, I think you've done that if you make housing a separate bullet point, that is important, and you can just say that the city should not just, I mean, if I ruled the world, the city would take a more proactive role in making sure that some of that housing happens. And they've taken some steps to do that. I mean, they've really changed the zoning code in a way that it allows a lot more densification in the central city, which is, I think, exactly what the growth policy says. You know, where we're doing that, you know, and you know, so I think the growth policy kind of says it all. It's just that you would like as a goal that it, over time, it gets implemented. I mean, do we need to get into the nitty gritty of what gets done first, or are these just sort of general statements that say this is important? Housing is important. Implementing the growth policy is important. Safe and healthy communities important. Financial stewardship kind of goes without saying, and a quality workforce kind of goes without saying. But the housing policy and the growth policy have real meat to them, and they really, you're making a statement about what the city should do next. You know, what order that comes in and the practicality of it probably isn't the place for a goal statement. But the goal statement is what you want to end up with.
So I'm wondering, I'm hearing housing, and I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think that's a huge issue for us. I'm hearing implementation of the growth policy and land use. We have removed infrastructure from the goals at this point. I mean, I think some of those, and Melissa, I'm gonna kind of tap you for your thoughts on that. I think some of those infrastructure type projects need a place to go if we're, you know, asking our city manager to make sure that specific projects are getting done, and we're evaluating, you know, the performance, that manager's performance on those goals. So I'm trying to get to the place where we have housing, we have growth policy, land use. Doesn't seem like those are the same.
What part of infrastructure isn't covered by the growth policy and housing?
That's a good idea.
Transportation, maybe?
That's a good question.
I'm actually looking at our growth policy right now while we're talking, and I don't know if I'm gonna see if I can get this.
All of it's covered in the land use plan.
All these charts here.
Plan on doing.
You see like these pages of spreadsheets here?
Yeah.
That's all just the implementation matrix. So we have a whole stack of goals just in the growth policy. So yes, we do have an entire transportation section in the growth policy. Infrastructure, water, things like that are covered in the growth policy.
Okay.
There were staff that also gave input, like Matthew and Shannon, so planning and public works. the public works director was an active participant in the process. So there are important infrastructure projects in our growth policy. So I do think that we should be, like Wyeth said, I am in agreement with Wyeth about really prioritizing and pulling out what's most important to work on. Because this is a really big document with lots and lots of stuff, and it does have immediate, near-term, midterm, and long-term goals. Like, so it breaks them up into 1 to 2 years, 3 to 5, 6 to 10, 10 plus. So it might make sense too for folks, if you haven't had a chance to look through the growth policy, it might also be a good use of your time if you haven't seen it, to consider what's the most important thing to pull out of this for the commission to work on first, to direct the city staff to work on, or city manager, excuse me, to work on first. So I like Wyatt's idea actually of pulling out some of the most important things. And I do agree with Tom that transportation or infrastructure, including transportation, is covered in here. Does that answer your question, Carrie? Or kind of speak to what you were concerned about?
I think that it does, you know, and I just grabbed my copy too, and I was just kind of flipping through quickly, and, you know, housing is in the growth policy, but I also just feel like housing.
Look, if we mention the growth policy and then mention housing particular, you know, as a separate goal, and I think you kind of covered it, just because the growth policy is a land use plan. It is kind of a phasing plan, and it is talking about what's important, and it is, you know, and it covers an awful lot of, it's sort of more comprehensive, whereas the housing plan is more specific. We're saying that this is a particular need and an immediate and more important need right now, and the city should really focus on it. And I think it should, I don't know how strong you want to say this, but the city should not just allow housing, but should promote housing. More
James?
proactive.
What do you think?
I don't think anybody should be promoting anything until we actually know where we're going to go with everything.
Right. Well, I mean,
If you have
by housing, you know, for example, you know, they could, you know, you could have a housing authority, you know, there's public, basically the housing probably won't be solved by simply allowing it. Somebody's gonna have to build it and probably subsidize it if it's gonna be at a certain income level. Left to its own devices, just sort of making higher zoning doesn't make it viable.
Yeah, I think
It solves part of the problem. It allows the problem to happen, but, you know.
Melissa?
I was just going to say, I think the housing action plan that we passed last night, really great read, everybody. If you haven't had a chance to look at it yet, it's really nice. It really lays out some specific priorities for the city, well, and also the county, but specifically the city. And it is not an overwhelming document the way the comprehensive plan or the growth policy can be, like a lot. The comprehensive plan has so much in it that it's a whole conversation about where to start with the comprehensive plan. So I'm still in favor of pulling out the housing action plan. I think that's what Wyeth suggested, was prioritizing housing. The nice thing about this is it is a roadmap, so to speak, not literally, James. So it's not a literal roadmap like you were kind of getting at, but it's like
well, it could be though.
It could be. But
And
it's
that's
like
what I want to get into. I want to get that to an actual factual roadmap where the city says, here's where it is. That's where you can build. Put this right here. And it works out with our overall plan of how we're going to operate the city.
Can I just finish really quick? So I just think, like, what's nice about this, I think, is it's not overwhelming, and it is a path forward. And we got a really nice presentation last night. I think that there's momentum and partners that are willing to help work with the city to move things forward. So I would like to see the city prioritize this. And also, James, I do like your idea of thinking outside the spreadsheet and thinking about other ways to present information. I think that it's useful to flex our brains a little bit and think about information in new ways.
Okay, I'm gonna cut in here for a second. And I think Wyeth is right. He said, let's get back to what our task is to set goals. So thank you, Wyeth. I appreciate that too. Wyeth, you said no need to read the last one, but I sort of really liked it. Sorry guys, I know I'm looking at something you can't see. But Wyeth referenced page 29 of the growth policy. And it's got 10 principles of smart growth. And the third principle that I just want to like stick in our brains here is create a range of housing opportunities and choices. So, I mean, that seems a lot for a goal, but sort of, I think, getting us in that.
I like the word create because it's a proactive word.
Yeah.
And that could be a goal in and of itself. Or it could mention the housing action plan, which I don't see a problem with that. I think we could mention the housing action plan.
I think implement the housing action plan is a
Yeah.
perfectly reasonable goal.
Right. And implement the growth policy. You just don't want to use implement in both bullet points.
Okay, I want to catch this because we're at 152. So I just want to implement.
Can I make a plug for?
Yeah.
I wanna echo what Wyeth was communicating. I was looking for smart growth that whole time, so thank you for finding it in the growth policy. I do think that the smart growth goals actually do cover a lot of the conversation that we've been having. Like strategy 3.4.1.1 is amend zoning ordinance and subdivision regulations to include smart growth strategies as requirements for all development prior to approval. I think that actually gets at some of the conversation we've been having, and that's just one example. So I do like the principles of smart growth, and they check a lot of boxes about the conversations we've been having with, I don't know, with this whole.
I mean, the whole plan is a smart growth plan.
No, it's not. The whole
No,
plan I don't think is smart growth.
Is as a movement, but it's pretty.
No, I think that the
Okay.
smart growth really dials it in a little bit more. I think you probably have a copy of this, Tom. It's on page 29 if you check it out.
I don't have it in front of me.
You can look at it later, but because
So,
just the growth policy is so big, and I think that's why we haven't prioritized things in it yet. Because it's so big. We have so much to do as a commission. And so I think the more we can dial it in for the commission, I think, and this has been my experience on the commission for 4 years, I think the more pointed we can make our recommendations and more dialed in, the more helpful it'll be to the commission when we get into meetings, rather than trying to figure it out ourselves in a very limited time with the very big agendas that we get.
So how would you word that in this?
So what about this? And then, and we're kind of winding down to the end. And so we've got implement housing action plan, and I put that in there for now as a holding spot, and implement growth policy. And I put smart growth in parentheses so we wouldn't lose it for the moment. I wonder if one of the words implement becomes prioritize, but range of housing choices. Yeah, and then Wyeth also chimed in with create a range of housing choices.
Well, both those
Execute.
plans are existing plans that have been adopted by the city.
I'm gonna put some words in here just so that we don't lose them.
Execute.
Somebody help me here.
PRIOR.
Sorry, okay. So I've just got I've got execute, prioritize, implement, just so that we're not losing those. Because I don't think we're gonna get a whole lot further today. Sorry, just one second. The mail lady's here. Hold on.
We're all gonna die.
Thank you.
Dogs
Thank
and
goodness
dogs.
you had that warning.
No, she brings snacks. So he hears her and then
Oh,
it's like, I'm here, give me the snack. So, yeah. Uh, so I don't want to lose that. So I'm wondering in a few minutes, I'm going to kind of go back to where we started today. So review goals, think about values. So I would suggest that we think about these goals for next time. Let's think about how we can maybe wordsmith 5 and 6. And then my suggestion would be, do we need all 6 of these? Do we need to lose something? Go ahead, Melissa.
I'm going to look through this some more. I would encourage other people to look through the growth policy some more because we have sections on most of these topics, I think. And maybe we can pull some things out that we think are most important for the commission to do first, knowing that this gets updated every few years. But if we can like really hone in on what's most important right now, I think maybe that could be helpful. I'm curious if that seems reasonable from others.
The only question I have is, I believe in the first meeting, we discussed that we were only going to talk about levels 2 and 3. So we weren't going to actually go into the weeds on evaluating how that worked. Do we want to redirect that and take a look at the actual priorities of the actual list?
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you, James. I meant the priorities from here.
Okay.
So the growth policy has like about a bajillion sections in it under each
Right.
one of these areas. And we
Okay.
can't do all of them at once. So I was thinking like what part of public engagement is the most important for the city to like, maybe there's a way we can hone it in, or safe and healthy community. What does that mean? Like maybe there's a way we can hone in and narrow down what we want the city to work on. That's just kind of what I was thinking. I'm open to not being stuck on this idea.
I see a check from Wyeth, so I'm going to take that as a thumbs up. Around that, Melissa. Oh, he's coming up to you.
I would just say, Melissa, to your point, like what we're trying to do here is create focus and priority until someone decides to rewrite this, right? It should live for 5 years in time frame. So the more direct the language, the more guidance is provided to the organization. So and I agree, if you haven't read the growth policy and the housing action plan, it's worth a read. There's a lot of good language in both of those documents.
I mean, I do like the idea of sort of calling those things out specifically, and because it is very specific, financial stewardship is kind of mushy, it's, of course you're going to do that, but that's actually a direction, execute the housing plan.
Well, I think without being told, the city can and will do financially poor decision-making now and again. It's just nature, it always happens.
Just can't help it.
Yeah.
It's 1:59. So I'm gonna have to bring us to a close, but I think we've kind of discussed what we want to look at and what we want to come back with next week. So let's do that. And I think that we can wrap it up for the day. Wait, Wyatt's coming up with something here. All right. Wyatt says he has the document ready to send out to us. So he's got our next slide deck. Sorry about the dog. And so I'm going to go ahead then and just move us to the end of the meeting. So first we'll do member comments. If anyone has any additional comments. James, I'm going to start with you. Any comments?
No, nothing for me.
Melissa?
Thank you, everybody. This is awesome.
Tom?
I think we've all sort of made our comments as we've gone along.
Great. And Wyatt, I'm just going to say thanks for tuning in. That'll be Oh wait, he's got one. Here we go. Let's see. No comments from Wyatt. And I'll just say thank you for the great conversation today, everyone. Then we have to go to public comments. I don't see any public here today. I'm gonna open my screen so you can see better, but open for public comment. I don't see any. All right. So I am gonna go ahead and adjourn this meeting of the Guiding Principles Strategic Planning Ad Hoc Committee today, Wednesday, June the 29th at 2:01 p.m. Thank you, everyone.
See you next week.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good.
Yep, have a great weekend.